Exploited, the Cyber Truth, a podcast by Security.
Welcome back, everybody, to Exploited, the Cyber Truth. I am Paul Ducklin. As regular listeners will know, I'm usually, and in fact every time so far, have been joined by Joe Saunders, CEO and founder of Security. Joe is not able to join us today. So instead, I'm all on my own. It's like I've passed my driving test. I'm driving with no one else in the car for the first time. I'm joined by a very special guest indeed, and that is Nick Chaillan, who has been a chief software officer in both the Air Force and the Space Force. Nicholas, that is quite the CV, if I may say so.
Today's guest is Nicolas Chaillan, and Nicolas is a great entrepreneur and a great technologist. But what sets him apart is his unwavering focus on innovation and delivery for the warfighter and to help the United States and the Department of War and Department of Defense achieve its mission at a faster and faster rate and beat China in technology competition. I've witnessed Nicolas up close roll out DevSecOps across the DoD, as well as saw him build Ask Sage from a concept to the most widely adopted Gen AI platform across the department. And what stood out to me is Nicolas prioritized innovation, making technology accessible, and certainly ensuring security is built in from the ground up. So Nicolas is a rare technologist who is an exceptional entrepreneur, an exceptional driver of innovation for the department. Please enjoy the conversation with Nicolas.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's a great pleasure. Now, Nick, our title today is Trust at Machine Speed, AI, DevSecOps, and Zero Trust in National Security Software. That sounds like an entire university course rather than a 30-minute podcast. So I'll try and be focused. But I think let's start with a little bit of your recent history. Now, your focus when you founded the company Ask Sage was innovation for warfighters, and you built an AI platform to help people use AI in a constructive, reliable, and non-product specific way. So do you want to say how you went about that and what you thought was important about doing it like that?
Yeah, I think it's very important, when it comes to the US government, not to get locked into one cloud provider or one LLM. So, we built a stack that brings not only the security, but also the abstraction so that you can have a single API, single source of truth, single data training, single enforcement layer so that it works, with all the models without losing the benefits of each of the different capabilities out there. And be able to consolidate it, bring it into a central place, and have a unified user experience, both on the UI side and the API side, so that teams can build agents and be able to tap every model and see what sticks. And for complex agents, it's actually very good to have access to all the models so you can see which one performs the best. And so it's been really the way to go, particularly when you see teams getting locked into, OpenAI or Anthropic or Google, and realizing that, new models come in every month and it's almost impossible to keep up, but also not wise to get locked into one.
So in a way, this is partly like what some cloud API providers are doing, so that if one cloud provider, say, puts their price up, you're not stuck with that. Or if you don't like the way negotiations are going, you can move. Or
Right.
Maybe it's a way of letting you use two cloud providers so you can have a primary and a backup. But with AI, things are a little bit different, as you just suggested, aren't they? That you might want to use 2, 3, 4, even more providers, or even connect in some open source models of your own,
Right.
so that you can actually compare and contrast the results, which is very different from what you want to do in the cloud. You don't want, I'll use two databases and then I'll see which one saves the data the best.
Right.
You want one that performs correctly. With AI results, particularly when you're doing things like intelligence gathering, you actually want to be able to compare and contrast before you come out with your own research, don't you?
Yeah, and for complex tasks, what you're going to find is agents have different step-by-step processes they need to achieve, and it's pretty
Yes.
clear that different models perform better than others for specific step-by-step tasks. And so you may use Gemini for video analysis, you may probably use Claude for coding and things like that, and also complex, agentic analysis as well. And then you may use something like, For Mini because it's inexpensive and easy for, some type of summarization or content analysis. So, having access, and there is a cost piece too, right? Each model, each versions have different costs. And so having kind of a centralized, unified, single pane of glass for your billing and your tracking of consumption is also essential when you build something at an enterprise scale like this as well.
And if you like, is homogenize the right word, the API, that means that you can build one way of talking to all the models instead of having to have 5 different software stacks, one for each, and then try and unify the things later by yourself.
Exactly. And it's, it doesn't scale when you need to replace one by the new fancy model. So, I think it's essential to have kind of this abstraction layer. So you have all the models and you can swap with one line of code. You can swap model, A to B, see how it performs, see how it sticks, and be able not to get locked into, to a single SDK or API mechanism. So I think it's, and that's why we, made it an open architecture. So it's easy to move on. I don't believe in getting people locked into to your product. I think if you bring value, you should be there. If you don't, you shouldn't. So, having kind of an open architecture and open framework with all the models, and you can bring your own models, you can bring, commercial models, and we release models same day as they're released. So, it's a great way for all the teams to move fast.
So I assume you could even have 2 different models from the same AI organization if you wanted to compare and contrast them when a new model comes out to see whether it is actually better than the old one, whether its results need processing differently, and so forth. So it's not just about, I need to jump from one provider to the other because they've got too expensive. It's also about maybe using lots of different models, but taking the best of each and combining them into a, if you like, a situation where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts.
That's right. And you can even make them, fight each other and come up with different,
yeah, exactly.
And, reflect, between models. I mean, sky is the limit. And then when you build complex agents, I think it's actually essential because I don't have a single agent myself that's now using all the model stacks. So, you need access to all of it.
Yes. If a simple analogy in software engineering might be that even if you love and are dedicated to C or C++, or even if you've made the jump to Rust because you think it's great, it's very likely that an entire project will have code in all sorts of different languages.
Right.
Plus it'll have documentation in HTML and CSS and JavaScript, etc. So there's rarely a one size that fits all in any sort of software engineering practice, is there?
I mean, it's kind of common sense now. People keep making the same mistakes and being short-sighted, trying to move fast, but creating a lot of technical debt.
Yes.
I think it's actually not that complex when you have a platform like Sage to be able to still move fast and probably even faster than most teams combined, and yet, not get locked into a provider. So
you're building upwards instead of digging a giant hole that you're going deeper and deeper into.
That's right.
So, Nick, let's get to what you might call the elephant in the room in this discussion. And that is that my understanding is that the Defense Department in the US has decided that it no longer wants to use Anthropic's models, particularly for warfighter or for mission for missile control systems, because they don't think it gives the openness that they want. But instead of just saying, well, let's use the other models then, if they're really so much better, they've sort of said, well, that no more Anthropic, no more Claude anywhere in the US federal government. Now, I guess they can make any decision they want, but that seems very short-sighted, a little bit like cutting your nose off to spite your face, if that's the right analogy.
Yeah, let me just start by saying that I'm no longer with Sage and Big Bear,
Right.
who just bought Sage, and so
Yeah.
those are my opinion, and I'm
Yes.
able to talk maybe a little bit more
Fair.
freely than people could when you're in a publicly traded company. So I think I'm a big supporter of President Trump, and I got to tell you, the president appointed someone called Emil Michael as the Undersecretary for Research and Engineering, and what we call the CTO of the Pentagon. He's not very technical, not very a good fit for the role, and not very liked. And he's made a lot of short-sighted mistakes. The first one was to create what he called GenAI.mil, where he wanted to bring a portal with each model provider, and went to OpenAI, Anthropic, Gemini, and XAI, and wanted an icon per model on the browser so you can go to their respective UIs. And before him, the team working with me understood what we talked about in terms of not getting locked in to one model, and not having to train data 4 times, and have to build agents 4 times, and have to support them and maintain them by using Sage to be able to have kind of an abstraction layer that we talked about. And so the former team understood the importance of not getting locked in. He, for some reason, whether it's incompetence or ego or whatever, he decided to create this portal with 4 different icons. 3 are turned off because they don't have the accreditation to run it. So they only have Gemini, which is even more short-sighted, right? Because you end up only at unclassed levels. They don't have secret and top secret, even though companies like Sage have all of the models, and we had them for 2 years now. And so you're going backwards, right? Bringing kind of this portal only with one model, and now you're kind of mandating it for everybody to use. And Google is pretty happy because they're the only one there, and so that kind of started the negotiation to get the other models added to the portal. Even though, again, we had OpenAI and Anthropic for 2 years before he even took the job. Then he tried to negotiate these deals, and that's where you see the issue with Anthropic. So effectively, he created a non-existent problem, because we had Anthropic for 2 years and everybody was using it, and it is by far the best model for agents and coding and many tasks. Very critical model, and it's also the most accessible and available across all classification levels, both in the intelligence community and in the Department of War. So it is a critical capability, and for coders particularly, with Cloud Code, there is no alternative really available to the department. So they don't have a backup plan, right? So that's concerning, right? So we obviously people are upset about the decision, particularly when there was no need for it. It's almost like creating non-existent problems, mostly driven by incompetence and ego. And so now they gotta remove it, losing what is today the best by far capability, and then going out of their way to retaliate with this new supply chain labeling, which is unheard of. It's never happened to a US company.
So that means that their product and their technology and their answers and the code they generate, or even just the suggestions that they give for the greater good of all, would be essentially prohibited in any aspect of federal government.
And they're contractors, which is pretty insane. So that impacts.
So this wouldn't just apply, say, to a missile system. It might apply to someone developing embedded devices for the power grid or water supply or wastewater disposal.
And it's not just the Department of War; it's the entire U.S. government, and it's all the contractors related to it. So by the way, there's no legal precedent. I don't think they would win in court if it goes to court, which I'm sure it will. And Anthropic is upset about it, and I would be upset too. I don't think it's the place of the government to retaliate against companies, particularly U.S. companies. I don't think that's okay. That's not something we should be doing, no matter the party, and particularly when there is no reason for it. Anthropic has been the most forward-leaning after maybe Astage, I guess, in AI in the Department of War. Astage was the first one, but they worked with the department from the very beginning with the intelligence community. They put it on the classified clouds before everybody else. And look, their arguments are pretty fair, right? It's not like the old days of Google with Project Maven back in the 5-6 years ago, where a couple of Google employees protested with their engagement with the Department of Defense at the time on the use of simple AI recognition algorithm, not even tied to weapons at all, and yet and certainly not autonomous as well, with human oversight. And yet you had a few hundred Google employees, which many, by the way, were Chinese employees at Google, which nobody talks about. And then Google decided to walk away and shut it down, which was, very short-sighted and very egregious, particularly when there was no, use of the technology in autonomous weapons at all. Google was not labeled as a supply chain risk or anything like that back then, right? And now you have a company that's just saying, hey, we have two lines. One is, we don't want to spy on Americans, which I hope everybody agrees with that. And then the second one is, no autonomous weapon with Gen AI, because the technology is not ready, but they're willing to work on R&D and work with the government to see how to make it ready. Which, most companies would not even want to do that. And yet, they're doing the right thing here, proposing to engage in a research mechanism to do that. And so, no one should be upset by this. By the way, no one with half a brain should want to use Gen AI in autonomous weapons anyways, because it's just not ready for it. So it's not even an issue, because, no one should want to do it. And so, again, we're creating non-existent problems, mostly driven by incompetence and ego, not rational thoughts, by people that are out of their depth and, selected by the president, unfortunately, with the wrong people here. And they got to go. They got to go. They're hurting the nation. They're China and Russia are laughing because, they are not waiting for us. They're using the technology. They have their own models as well, and they're not making those mistakes. They're certainly not shooting themselves on the foot, fighting with their own internal companies. That's not something we should be even wasting time on. And by the way, there was no issue, right? I never had a single warfighter reach out to me and be like, hey, Anthropic is blocking my queries or slowing me down. And, and I was the largest, deployment in the department. So if anyone had complaints, they would have come to me. And I never had a single person complain about Anthropic. We had complaints about
if they weren't getting what they wanted out of one model, the whole idea is, as I understand it, in a free market economy, you go and use one of the others. It's not as though Anthropic had a monopoly on this. There's plenty of competition. And
you don't ban them, right? I mean, you don't have to go and ban, from the entire US government just because, you don't agree on the 1% use case, which, by the way, can't even be done. So why are you thinking about it? So it's just, the whole thing makes no sense.
So it seems like a kind of argument that's set to blow off an awful lot of steam in the near future, because it has got passions running quite hot. Certainly I can see that in you. And
but by the way, the impact for startups and companies, right, that will not get involved with the department now. It should not be underestimated. I think it's, by the way, very few companies are willing to work with the Department of War at all. Anthropic was the first one to say, yes, let's do it, and then we call them woke and whatever, which is absolutely not true. There are plenty of woke AI companies out there, and Anthropic is not one of them. We don't go after the 200 plus companies refusing to do any work with the Department of War. And I'm not saying we should, but the fact is, many companies now are not going to be eager to engage in any way with the department, and it's already hard enough, right, to get through the clearance and contracting and you know cyber nightmare to get accredited and be working with the government with crazy timing to get a contract done and all these bottlenecks. So now you're adding this kind of uh, additional pain to the game. You just lost. And by the way, the department has been complaining about the defense industrial base shrinking over the last 20, 30 years, but they do everything to make it worse, right? So
Yes, and it seems particularly when you then say, well, let's turn this into what is effectively a ban on a company that maybe has some principles in one particular area, whether you agree with them or not. It doesn't seem that it's useful to say, well, that means you're not allowed to play at all.
right. And
You
by the
know,
way, even
oh,
if they decide not to use it, right? Let's say the government decides, hey, we're not going to use it, right? Doesn't mean you label them as a supply chain risk. That is of two very different things. And it's completely egregious that the government would do something like this, because now you're impacting companies and private companies. It is completely unacceptable. That is what a dictatorship would do. That's what China would do. That's what nations that we don't want to look like would do. That's completely unacceptable. Not to mention that OpenAI and Google have the same constraints and the same red lines, and yet nobody talks about banning them.
well, it seems that talking about supply chain risks, actually, those exist primarily because of the drive towards open source software. Now, Joe said in several previous podcasts that some of the estimates of federal government software projects, both inside and outside the military sphere of operations, will typically have up to 85% of open source stuff. So less than 20% of the code will come from the company that may be commercializing it or supporting it or selling it or is under contract for it. So surely any sort of analytical or intelligence gathering technology, including AI, that you can use to help you validate this sea of software that you're sucking in from goodness knows where, is likely to work for the greater good of all. And declaring part of that possible cyber defense based on American AI technology to be a supply chain risk, like I said, it does seem to be a little bit of a cut off your nose to spite your face,
Oh yeah,
because it doesn't actually stop the real supply chain risks,
right.
which can even happen by mistake. In other words, nobody's actually trying to attack you, but you're just making egregious mistakes because you're making poor choices. So the person might not want to do America down. It might be that you've decided to trust somebody who isn't as good as you think at software engineering, which at the end of the day could be as big a risk as someone who's deliberately implanted a vulnerability. Because
Which, by the way, if you look at the
exploitable,
last 500 vulnerabilities found in some of the most critical open source projects, those were found by Claude 4.6 Opus, the Anthropic model. So you're now taking away the best capabilities to help defend and protect software from the Department of Defense as well. So you're compounding the problem.
So, do you want to say something more generally about that how you manage that balance of attack and defense when it comes to AI in software engineering? By all means, focus on the military applications if you want, but I think these lessons are absolutely valid for everybody, whether your software is going into a missile or into a router that could be exploited at someone's house to perform some kind of attack against anybody or anything, really.
Yeah. No, I think it's a very scary world. I think particularly in the last 2 months, AI is now at a state where you can actually replace humans for real. Too many people don't understand it yet, and they dismiss it. Talk about hallucinations and different issues that you see with AI, but people that know how to use it now, and people like me, we actually now I'm at a stage where Essays was created with very few people, and I can tell you I could now do an entire company just with me and nobody else. And sure, I'm a little bit unique, but I can tell you it's only getting better. And so there's many jobs, particularly in coding and testing and cyber related roles that are completely gone. So when you
Do you
look,
think they'll be completely gone, or do you think we will just have a world where the humans can free themselves up for what you might call higher order tasks?
yeah,
In the
people
same way
say,
that once we got pocket calculators, we didn't have to bother with the mess that was the slide rule anymore.
look, I think people are comparing the wrong things. I think it's going to be way worse than the calculator or the automotive robotic shift or industrial revolution, whatever you want to call it. All these things were expensive, slow, took years, right? Is there going to be new jobs around AI? Sure. Are they going to replace the old jobs? Absolutely not. But also, when you have the cost of tokens and AI so low still compared to humans, and you can take one human to do, like I just created a product right before I left Big Bear, and in 3 days I built what would have taken probably 60 engineers full time with one person, including marketing and a website and everything, right? Brochures, PDFs, visuals. So all the visual graphic people are gone. So no, I don't think it's just augmenting people anymore. I think it is replacing people. And sure, you're not going to completely replace 100% of the workforce. I'm not saying that, but I think you're going to have a 1-to-10 ratio within 5 years. So you're gonna have one human do 10 people's job. And sure, you could do more work and do more stuff, but companies are also going to try to save money, and you already see it happening. And so you're gonna see. I mean, my unfortunate bet, and I don't like any of it. Don't get me wrong, but it's going to happen whether I like it or not. I'm thinking at least between 18 to 35%, if not more, of jobs in the non-blue collar industry gone within 5 years. So it's going to be a catastrophe. That's why you hear all these AI leaders, often not very. They don't really care about humans, by the way. Just to be clear, talk about universal base income, and we all know it's not going to work, and we all know it's going to be a disaster, and people need a purpose, and they need to have a reason to exist. So the whole thing is going to be a catastrophe. In fact, my AI agents puts the chance of a civil unrest within 5 years at 45%, which is insane.
So what are those 18 to 35% of the people going to do?
Exactly nothing. And I don't think. I mean, look, we have a lot of need in the blue collar industry. So unfortunately, we had very short-sighted leaders that made it look like those jobs were not long-term successful opportunities, which obviously they were completely wrong. We need plumbers, electricians, all these jobs. We need a lot of it. But a lot of people will have a tough time reinventing themselves, going from sitting on a couch with a laptop to working in the sun or in crawling spaces. And it's going to be. I mean, I don't think a lot of people talk about AI becoming a force for good and lifting the society. I don't think that's true at all. I think we're going to see a lot of innovation, probably more than ever, and it's going to create some jobs, I'm sure. But I think on the short term, before that happens, there's going to be massive job impact, and I don't think the government is ready for it. It's not just the U.S.; it's worldwide. I think the U.S. is going to go a little bit faster. And look, companies are greedy and they want to save cost, and maybe they should. That's their job. So they're gonna cut jobs. I mean, you saw Microsoft, cut just in the last 6 months, cut about what is 15% of their workforce. No one talks about it, but it's 20. I forgot, maybe 15, 20,000 people. That's a lot of people.
Well, they have done that kind of thing has happened before, hasn't it? Just depending on growth and shrinking cycle.
It's just way more
Which is-
fat. They're talking about another 20. So it's like, yes, but it's a lot, and it's back to back, and I don't think it's going to change. I think it's only going to get worse. But these companies are pretty slow actually at actually using AI, right? So they still don't grasp what can be done with it. And sure, I may be a little bit too early or too forward leaning or whatever you want to call it, but I can tell you what I've done is scary. And for the first time in 41 years of me being alive, I'm actually scared of this technology at all, of any technology. So it's actually I don't know what to tell my girls to learn. What should they focus on? We had they're 5 and 7, and I was like, are we gonna do coding lessons, or and is there even a point to do any of it? So it's just a very weird and scary time, and I don't think people really understand it yet.
So, what would your advice be to somebody who is, for example, right now thinking of getting, say, into traditional software engineering? How would
Well, number
you
one, they
how
got
would
to
you
embrace.
advise them to to sort of learn their way around using new technologies to
Yeah,
do not just old things faster, but maybe new things in a more interesting way? It seems
I
that
think
we
there's
still
two.
have plenty of things that we could invent
Yeah.
and
Oh yeah.
have a lot of fun with, right?
Yeah, yeah, but not a lot of people, are capable of doing that kind of stuff. But let's take a step back, right? There's two main skills that humans need to have today. One is self-learning and the ability to learn without being without someone holding your hand to do it. So I think that was always my best skill. I was able, to learn to fly a plane all the way to, woodworking and coding and whatever else by myself very rapidly. Um, so I think,
It's a bit like, I believe it's an Albert Einstein saying that when you've been working for 20 years, make sure
right.
you have 20 years of experience, not 1 year of experience 20 times.
Yes, but I think there is you can learn to learn, right, and to motivate yourself to do it, right?
Yeah.
So like, people just always find excuses not to do it, or they feel like they need to go, get lessons. I mean, look, you have YouTube, you can learn anything. It's just a good excuse for people not to do it. But I'm convinced that anyone actually can learn on YouTube any topic they want to learn. For example.
Some things you'd hope would still retain some degree of supervision in the learning process, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't
Becoming a
know.
pilot, for
Well,
example,
look, you have to pass the test,
if
right?
that's still a job in 20 years' time. I don't know
Well,
whether
you have
it
to
will
pass the
be.
test and whatnot.
Yeah.
But you can still learn it, right? And then you have to prove it in a way that's safe, I guess. But that's, I guess, the one skill. And then the other one is, I see too many people dismissing AI and like, oh, I tried it for 5 minutes and it's hallucinating and it's doing junk. And I know you don't know how to use it until you need to wake up, right? And I think
Aren't you a bit more worried though about people who do that experiment and they do get poor results, but they kind of either don't care or don't realize, and
right,
they just plow on anyway?
yeah,
That kind of gets us all into a much more serious problem because they're digging a hole that they
right,
themselves won't
yes.
know how to get out of.
And both sides are bad, right? Not using it and pretending it's not happening, they are guaranteed to not have a job in 2 years with 100% surety. So that's bad.
So, and if you run a company and you have things that can currently be assisted with AI, but you decide you're not going to use them, would you agree that you're probably deceiving yourself because someone in your company is going to be doing it for you?
Yeah.
Sort of shadow IT. They'll just go, well, if you won't buy me the tokens, maybe I'll just put them on the credit card and just see how it goes. And
Yes.
so if
Oh,
you
yeah.
don't know what results to expect, then you're not going to be able to tell what's going on in the business. Would you agree
I
with
don't
that?
see a lot of that anymore. I think that was true in 2023 and 2024. I think company leaders, at least companies that will still exist in 5 years, have awakened and start understanding it. I still see, studies saying 80% of companies that spend a bunch of money in AI saw no return on investment. I'm like, you guys are already, clueless, but I don't know how that's even possible. I don't understand how you could spend a bunch of money in AI and not get results. Maybe they were using Copilot or something. But it's just scary. Like, we don't have a choice, and when you're competing against every nation and one guy in his basement creating a new startup now with AI, big companies have a tough time innovating and keeping up. That's why they buy companies, right? But now you're competing against this one or two people, which can be very lean and very effective if you actually know someone like me. I'm dangerous. I mean, I can compete now with pretty much any company on the software side, at least, without touching the hardware stuff, very very easily, at a pace that no company can even come close to. So of course, you don't have a ton of people that have both the entrepreneurial background, the visionary kind of tech, where is that going, background, and then the AI skills to make it all happen together. But I think it's gonna, within 2-3 years, you're gonna have a bunch of younger kids that will, make that happen. So I think, and what scares me is I see still at universities and stuff, I see kids that dismiss AI completely, like coders just coming out of school. And of course, all schools are so bad at teaching anything related to IT. Most universities, including the most prestigious ones, when you take the kids coming out, 5-year degree or whatever, they are completely useless. They learn the wrong languages, they learn the wrong stuff. It's completely worthless, right? I can tell you they're not learning Rust or AI. In fact, they ban AI most of the time. I mean, all of it is such a waste of their money to go to those universities. And so anyway, my point is, you got to really embrace it, and people putting their head in the sand and pretending it's going to go away, they're going to pay the price dearly. And I don't think you can come back from it once you're gone, with the jobs getting cut. Even if they cut 20%, right? The 20%, the first 20% will be the people that didn't use it at all. And that's why you see companies have metrics now. I don't know if you've seen that, but many Fortune 500 have metrics about how much you use AI, because they already want to start tracking it to be able to get rid of those people.
So, to finish up, what advice would you have for someone in software engineering, whether we're talking about, mission critical stuff, missile systems, conducting warfare related stuff, defense stuff, or just, something to help water go more smoothly along a pipe, and
Yeah.
so that when you open the tap it comes out. If For anyone who's struggling to make sense of AI development, and it sounds as though what you're saying is that most people are at least trying, but they may not be very successful because they're just pressing the buttons and hoping that that means that not only do they not have to write the code, maybe they don't even have to think about it either. What would you advise for people, so that if they do decide, I'm going to embrace AI, how do they make well-informed decisions so that it works for them rather than, as you say, instead of them, or even
Right.
worse, against them?
Yeah. So there's a few things, right? One, you have to have the right tools. So you look at OpenClaw, huge agentic improvement. That's all I use today. It's amazing. So OpenClaw, you put it on a Mac Mini or whatever. Don't put it on your device. Put it on a laptop that you don't use, or on a VM on the cloud or whatever, but don't put it on your stuff. And then it becomes your executive agent for everything. And so you can have it code reflect on security, but you have to know what to ask. I think that the main issue that people struggle with is AI does not replace your brain in terms of the vision, where you're headed, what you want it to do. If you don't tell it to have security baked in and DevSecOps and follow a DevSecOps pipeline and build a DevSecOps pipeline and do CV scanning and software static analysis and reflect on the code. In fact, I have a gate now on my pipeline that my agent built that use AI itself to assess the code, and it finds more stuff than all of the scanning tools we put on the pipeline for static dynamic analysis, CV scanning, software bill of material, and all these scanners. I can tell you the AI stage of the pipeline is able to find more issues, both in security, but also in testing, than the unit testing and integration testing. I built this product in 3 days. It built its own DevSecOps pipeline. It built its own, AI assessment. It built 1,200 tests, 100,000 lines of code in 3 days with the product, the website of the product, the entire marketing and visuals for LinkedIn posts. And so you could build an entire business in 3 days. But one, you need to know what to ask. You have to have the right vision. You need to be precise. You need to say, hey, software security is not an afterthought. It needs to be baked in, right? You have to give it the context, the guidance, just like you would to an employee. And in fact, I think of it as a bunch of employees that work 24/7 and, don't complain, I guess. But that's kind of the way I kind of give it the right insight and focus and, kind of background. So it knows, what are we building? Hey, we're working for the Department of War. We can't mess up, right? Security is key, right? So I give it all these kind of, before jumping and say, oh, I'm going to build this and, create a button right now. No, let's build the architecture, the scope of work, the foundation for the DevSecOps pipeline, all the tooling, all the scanning tools, right? And by the way, he was able to deploy it on GitHub with GitHub Actions, build the entire pipeline in 4 minutes with all the stages. That would have taken a human like a month just to do the pipeline.
So to really finish up, where would someone start learning the right things to ask? Is that really a question of diving in and learning by trying and learning by example?
It's interesting, right? You're never going to replace experience, right? This was my 188th product, right? So I know what it takes to build a company. It's my 14th company, right? So I know what it takes to get there. I know the right, mistakes to avoid, right? All these different step-by-step things. You could ask it and you could have it self-reflect on, hey, what should I do? What's the next step? If you were very successful entrepreneur, what would you do if you were me? What do you think of my idea? The issue also is you bring your bias, right? If you say, oh, I'm going to build this product, it's great, people are going to love it. You just created a bias in the agent, and now it's going to be like, oh, your stuff is great, even though it's not great, and you don't know it's not great, right? Yes. So it's all about prompting. It's all about how you bring things up. You could ask the same question in a different way and create bias and be like, hey, is this a right idea? Or you could say, give me the top 5 course of action for me to take, instead of telling it the one you want to take or the one you think is best. Don't give it to him. Just say, hey, give me the 5 best options, and then you reflect, and then you decide, and then you can even have it reflect across the models. For complex tasks or decisions, I just did a big investment decision, which, by the way, I went with the agent decision and didn't listen to Morgan Stanley or JP Morgan for very big investment. And I listened to my agent, which will know if I was right or not. But I had Claude, OpenAI, and Gemini fight each other to come to the conclusion, and they change and they adjusted based on bouncing ideas between the models. So I think it's a very interesting world. It's a very scary world. I don't know what's going to happen for younger particularly entry level jobs, right? Because people don't know what to do, and they might not have the opportunity to learn by making a bunch of mistakes anymore like we used to. So but you got to be on top of it. You're going to learn, you're going to go watch videos, you're going to invest in yourself instead of spending time on TikTok and whatever stupid stuff you do, and that's going to be a 50% of the battle right there. So
excellent. Well, thanks, Nick. I guess some of your views could be considered controversial, but it's quite clear that you've tried this, you've lived this, and it seems that your primary advice is, if you're going to start using AI to help you finish tasks, don't tell it the result you want to achieve in advance, because that is a kind of self-defeating prophecy, if you like, because you'll get the thing that you thought of. And so an open mind, I guess, goes an awful long way.
That's right.
Nick, thanks so much for your time and your passion. Thanks to everybody who tuned in and listened. If you find this podcast insightful, please don't forget to subscribe so that you know when each new episode drops. Please like and share us on social media as well. We really love it when you do that. And once again, thanks to everybody who tuned in and listened. And remember, everybody, stay ahead of the threat. See you next time.